In 1998, a scientific announcement sent a massive shockwave across the United States. It wasn't about a new planet or a medical cure, but about a man who had been gone for nearly 2 centuries. Thomas Jefferson, the primary author of the Declaration of Independence and the third President of the United States, was suddenly at the center of a biological mystery that would rewrite American history books. For almost 200 years, a specific story had been passed down through oral traditions, whispered in the halls of power, and fiercely debated by scholars. It was a story of a secret family, a connection that crossed the most rigid social lines of the 18th century. Most mainstream historians had dismissed these claims as mere rumors or political smears from Jefferson's rivals. But then the molecules spoke. A group of scientists used cutting-edge DNA testing to look into the past, and what they found didn't just suggest a connection. It provided a level of scientific proof that forced the entire world to confront the complicated human reality of a founding father. This isn't just a story about genetics. It is a story about how a single strand of DNA can break down the walls of historical denial and reveal a truth that was hidden in plain sight for generations. To understand why these DNA results were so explosive, we have to look at the world Thomas Jefferson built at his estate, Monticello. Jefferson was a man of intense contradictions. He wrote that all men are created equal, yet he held hundreds of people in bondage. Within this complex social structure lived a woman named Sally Hemings. For years, the Hemings family maintained a very specific oral history. They claimed that Thomas Jefferson was the father of Sally's 6 children. During Jefferson's own lifetime, political enemies published these accusations, but Jefferson himself never publicly responded, and his white descendants maintained for generations that it was physically and morally impossible. They often pointed the finger at Jefferson's nephews, suggesting they were the ones responsible for the Hemings children. This standoff between oral tradition and academic skepticism lasted for nearly 2 centuries. Then came the late 90s. Dr. Eugene Foster, a retired pathology professor, decided that the mystery didn't have to remain a matter of opinion. He realized that the Y chromosome, which is passed down almost unchanged from father to son, held the key. If he could find direct male line descendants of Thomas Jefferson and compare their DNA to direct male line descendants of Sally Hemings' children, the science would provide a definitive answer. The problem was that Thomas Jefferson had no surviving sons with his wife, Martha. However, he did have a paternal uncle, Field Jefferson, who had a well-documented male line. Because Thomas and Field shared the same father, they shared the same Y chromosome. This provided the genetic baseline. The researchers tracked down several descendants of Field Jefferson to establish the Jefferson family DNA signature. Then they found male line descendants of Eston Hemings, Sally's youngest son. When the results came back from the lab, the scientific community was stunned. The Y chromosome of the Eston Hemings line was a perfect match to the Jefferson family line. The probability of this happening by chance was incredibly low. The DNA provided a biological link that could no longer be ignored. While the test alone couldn't say it was Thomas specifically, the historical context solidified it. Thomas was the only Jefferson at Monticello during every single window of conception for Sally's children. The rumor was no longer a rumor. It was a scientific reality. The aftermath of this discovery changed everything in the way we view American history. It broke the seal on a long-standing tradition of protecting the image of historical figures at the expense of the truth. For the first time, the lived experiences and oral histories of marginalized families were given the same weight as the written records of the elite. It showed that the family tree of the United States was much more interconnected and complex than the official narratives had ever admitted. The DNA of Jefferson and Hemings became a symbol of a shared American heritage that includes both the architects of liberty and those who were denied it. This revelation at Monticello sparked a massive wave of similar research. Historians and geneticists began to realize that the archives are often silenced by the people who wrote them, but the DNA is a neutral witness. This interdisciplinary approach, combining genetic science with traditional history, has since identified dozens of previously unknown family connections from the colonial era. It has moved us away from a history of great men and toward a history of real people. It reminds us that behind every statue and every plaque, there were human relationships, secret lives, and biological legacies that continue to pulse through the veins of people living today. The impact on the descendants was profound. The DNA results were a moment of immense validation. Their family story had been treated as a myth or a lie. The science finally stood up for them. It allowed them to reclaim their place in the American story, not as outsiders, but as direct descendants of one of the nation's founders. On the other side, many of Jefferson's white descendants had to navigate a new understanding of their family. The DNA forced a conversation about race, power, and identity that was long overdue. It brought people together who had been separated by a wall of history, proving that they were in fact cousins. But the science revealed even more than just a family connection. When researchers looked deeper into the Jefferson Y chromosome, they found something that shocked even the geneticists. Thomas Jefferson's Y chromosome belongs to a rare haplogroup in England called K2. This specific genetic signature is much more common in the Middle East and parts of East Africa. It suggests that thousands of years ago, Jefferson's paternal ancestors migrated from the Levant or North Africa into Europe. This means that the man who is often seen as the quintessence of Western Enlightenment heritage carried an ancient biological history that connected him to the very regions of the world his contemporaries considered exotic or other. It is a beautiful irony that science loves to provide. The more we seek to categorize people, the more we find that we are all beautifully intertwined. This genetic discovery at Monticello did more than just settle a paternity suit. It essentially dismantled the concept of the pure historical narrative. It forced museums and historical sites across the country to change how they interpret the past. If you visit Monticello today, the story of Sally Hemings and her children is center stage. It is no longer a footnote or a whisper. The DNA acted as a key that unlocked a room of history that had been boarded up for a very long time. It allowed the site to become a place of honest reflection rather than a shrine to a polished image. The technological leap required for this study in 1998 was significant, but compared to what we can do now, it was just the beginning. Today, we can sequence entire genomes from a single strand of hair or a fragment of bone. We are entering an era of biographical science, where no historical mystery is truly safe from the truth. We are seeing this happen with figures like Richard the Red, whose remains were identified in a parking lot via DNA, and with the identification of the long-lost children of various royal houses. The Thomas Jefferson study was the pioneer of this movement. It proved that the public wants the truth, even if it makes the history more complicated. The reason this matters for the future is that it teaches us how to handle the imperfections of our leaders. We often want our heroes to be flawless, but science shows us that they were people with the same complexities and contradictions that we have today. Jefferson was a brilliant philosopher and a flawed man. He was a champion of freedom and a person who struggled with the realities of his era. By acknowledging his relationship with Sally Hemings through the DNA results, we don't lose the brilliance of his writing. Instead, we gain a more profound understanding of the human condition. We see the messy, vibrant, and often painful reality of how the American experiment was actually lived. This discovery also highlights the importance of preserving biological history. As more people take interest in their own ancestry through commercial DNA tests, we are seeing a mass awakening to the fact that we are all connected. The Thomas Jefferson case was the first time this was played out on a national stage with a high-profile figure. It set a precedent for how we use science to verify history. It showed that when there is a conflict between a written record and a biological record, the biology usually has the final word. The scientific journey to find the descendants was a detective story in itself. Researchers had to wade through centuries of census records, marriage licenses, and burial sites to find the direct male line participants. Many in the Eston Hemings line had moved to the Midwest and had eventually integrated into the white community, losing their connection to their African American roots over time. The DNA didn't just find a connection to Jefferson. It helped these people rediscover their own history. It was a process of reuniting a family with itself. Across the boundaries of time and social categorization, the DNA results also forced a re-evaluation of Jefferson's own writings. Scholars began to look at his notes and letters with a new understanding of what was happening in his private life. It added a layer of human emotion to his political work. Did his relationship with Sally Hemings influence his views? How did he reconcile his private life with his public persona? Science gave historians a new set of data points to use when trying to answer these deep psychological questions. It turned a two-dimensional figure into a three-dimensional human being. One of the most interesting aspects of the DNA study was the role of the Jefferson family nephews. Peter and Samuel Carr were the ones the family had blamed for generations. Foster's team tracked down their descendants too, and tested their DNA. Their Y chromosome was completely different from the Jefferson signature. They were effectively cleared by the science. This part of the result was crucial because it eliminated the alternate theory that had been used for a century to avoid the truth. Science didn't just provide a yes for Jefferson. It provided a no for the Carr nephews. The ripple effect of this case reached all the way to the Smithsonian and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. The Jefferson Hemings story is now a foundational part of how we teach the complexity of the Atlantic world. It shows that the history of the United States is not a story of separate groups living side by side, but a shared biological and cultural journey. The DNA results acted as a catalyst for a more inclusive educational system that isn't afraid to look at the shadows as well as the light. When we consider the science of haplogroups in Jefferson's line, it also reminds us that all of us are migrants. Jefferson's haplogroup K2 traces back to some of the earliest farmers and travelers who entered Europe. If such a foundational American figure has an ancestry that leads back to the heart of the Middle East and Africa, it makes the arguments about pure national identities seem a bit absurd. Our biology is a record of travel, adaptation, and mixing. Jefferson's DNA is a testament to the fact that there is no such thing as a closed gate in the human story. The 1998 study also changed the nature of historical research. Before this, a historian's work was mostly done in libraries. Now a historian might also be found in a genetics lab. This collaboration has opened up new ways to solve cold cases from the past. We are finding the remains of unknown soldiers, identifying the victims of historic tragedies, and tracing the movement of ancient populations with a precision that would have seemed like magic 100 years ago. The Jefferson DNA Project was the proof of concept for this entire field. Another insane result of this project was the shift in Monticello's own staff and community. The people who work at the estate today come from a wide variety of backgrounds, and many are dedicated to telling the full story. The DNA results empowered the staff to speak the truth with confidence. They no longer had to say some believe or it is rumored. They could say the science shows. This shift from speculation to fact-based interpretation has made Monticello one of the most respected historical sites in the world. We also have to look at the impact on the concept of family. What defines a family? Is it a name? Is it a marriage certificate? Or is it the blood that flows through the veins? The Jefferson Hemings case suggests that the biological bond is a powerful truth that eventually finds its way to the surface. It expanded the definition of the Jefferson family to include a much wider and more diverse group of people. It showed that family history is not something that belongs to a few, but a shared heritage that connects us all. The scientific community learned a lot about the limitations and strengths of Y DNA during this study. It was a perfect case study for how to track a lineage through multiple generations. Because the Y chromosome doesn't recombine with each generation, it stays remarkably stable. This allows us to look back hundreds of years with incredible clarity. The Jefferson study is still cited in textbooks today as a primary example of how genetic genealogy can solve historical puzzles. One of the most beautiful outcomes was the 2018 opening of the Sally Hemings exhibit at Monticello. For the first time, her living quarters were restored and presented as a place of historical significance. This wouldn't have happened without the DNA evidence. The science provided the political and social leverage needed to give Sally Hemings her own voice in history. It shifted her from a mystery woman in the background to a central figure in the American narrative. It was a victory for the truth achieved through the lens of a microscope. The shock of the DNA results also reminds us of the fragility of our historical records. Files can be burned, letters can be lost, and stories can be suppressed. But our cells carry a backup of the records. DNA is the ultimate archival storage system. Even when the world tries to forget, the molecules remember. This gives us hope for other historical mysteries that seem impossible to solve. Someday we might have the genetic data to answer questions about the lost colony of Roanoke or the final resting place of ancient leaders. The Thomas Jefferson story also serves as a warning about the danger of putting historical figures on too high a pedestal. When we do that, we make them less than human, and we make the truth more difficult to accept. When the DNA results came out, some people were genuinely upset because it didn't fit their image of the perfect founder. But as time has passed, most people have realized that the truth makes Jefferson a much more interesting and relevant figure. It allows us to learn from his life in a way that is honest and real. The role of the media in 1998 was also crucial. When the prestigious journal Nature published the results, it became front-page news worldwide. It was a moment when science and culture collided in a way rarely seen. It brought genetic genealogy into the mainstream, paving the way for the multi-billion-dollar industry of consumer DNA testing we see today. People realized that if a president's family secrets could be revealed by a simple test, maybe their own family secrets were waiting to be discovered too. As we look at the genetic signature of the Jefferson line today, we see a story of resilience. The descendants of Sally Hemings carried the Jefferson DNA through the Civil War, through the era of Jim Crow and into the modern age. They carried it even when they didn't know exactly what it was. It is a biological torch that was passed from hand to hand for 200 years. The DNA results didn't create the connection. They simply turned the light on so we could all see it. The interdisciplinary nature of the project also showed that researchers need to listen to community voices. The Hemings family had been telling the truth for generations. We are learning about their crafts, their cooking, their songs, and their family structures. The DNA results for Jefferson opened the door to the stories of everyone else who lived at Monticello. It was a tidal wave of truth that washed over the entire mountain. It's also worth considering the advances in the science of haplogroups since the Jefferson study. We now know so much more about haplogroup K2 and its origins. We have mapped its journey from the Near East through southern Europe and finally into the British Isles. We can see the specific mutations that happened along the way. Thomas Jefferson's DNA is a tiny piece of a global map that connects all of us to the cradle of civilization. It is a reminder that the story of America is just a chapter in the much larger story of humanity. The Jefferson-Hemings DNA project remains one of the most significant moments in the history of science and the humanities. It proved that the past is not a foreign country. It is right here with us, in our very cells. It showed that the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how much time passes. It taught us that our heroes was human. Our families are diverse, and our history is shared. The shock has faded into a deep and settled understanding. It is simply part of the fabric of American history now. It has helped us grow as a society, allowing us to have more honest conversations about who we are and where we come from. The DNA of a president and an enslaved woman has become a shared legacy for an entire nation. It is a story of connection that transcends the limitations of the past. The science of DNA is a truth teller that doesn't care about our comfort or our myths. It only cares about the code. By following that code, we were able to rewrite a chapter of history in a way that is more honest, more inclusive, and more human. The Thomas Jefferson DNA results changed everything because they showed us that the truth is always more powerful than the story we tell ourselves. It is a lesson that will resonate for as long as we continue to study our past. As we look toward future scientific discoveries, we can be certain that more shocking revelations are on the horizon. Each one will challenge us to see the world differently. Each one will force us to reconsider what we thought we knew. And each one will bring us closer to the collective truth of our species. The Jefferson study was a beacon, showing us that when we have the courage to look at the science, we can finally see the reality of our own history. It is a beautiful, messy, and incredibly human reality that we should all value. In the end, Thomas Jefferson's DNA did something he probably never intended. It united a family that had been divided by law and custom for 200 years. It proved that despite the walls we build, life finds a way to connect. The molecules don't see color, they don't see status, and they don't see borders. They only see the continuity of life. And that is perhaps the most important scientific discovery of all. The truth of Hollywood's secrets or presidential hidden lives is interesting. But the truth of our common biological bond is what really changes history. Jefferson's legacy is now whole, not as a myth of a pure founder, but as the lived reality of an American family. That is the true power of DNA. It changes everything.